Hey guys! In today's video, I will share a moving and meaningful story based on a near-death experience that completely transformed an ordinary person's life. It's a story of faith, overcoming, and hope that you won't want to miss. Before we start, I want to know what city you're watching from. Leave it here in the comments. And of course, if you are not yet subscribed to the channel, take the opportunity now to subscribe and activate the bell, so you don't miss any of our upcoming inspiring content. Let's go on this journey together. My name is Harper Ellington. I'm just an ordinary person, someone who prefers to go unnoticed in the crowd. I live in Helena, Montana, a quiet town where life is usually simple, surrounded by mountains and blue skies. I am a mother, grandmother, and someone who has faced life with its storms and calms. But what I'm going to tell you now is something that changed my existence forever. On a Sunday morning, going to my first grandson's baptism, I experienced something I never imagined possible. I experienced death, or almost. For 21 minutes and 37 seconds, I was clinically dead. What I saw, felt, and learned during that time was not only real, it was transformative. I don't write books about it. I don't give talks or seek attention. I live my life in the most ordinary way possible. But something inside me knows I need to share this. You can choose to believe it or not, but I ask you, listen. This is my story. It was a typical Sunday in Helena, Montana. The sun was rising behind the mountains, turning the sky orange. The city, still silent, seemed enveloped in an unusual tranquility. I, Harper Ellington, was already awake and organizing the last details for the baptism of Ethan, my first grandson. On the kitchen table, Ethan's gift awaited me, a brown leather-bound Bible, engraved with his name in gold letters. I ran my fingers over the letters, admiring the delicate work. "This is the beginning of a life of faith for you," I murmured, as if I could speak directly to him. After checking my watch, I realized it was time to leave. My son, Thomas, had asked me to arrive early to help them with the preparations. I grabbed my Bible, purse, and car keys. Before leaving, I took a deep breath, feeling immense gratitude for that day. The highway was quiet. Only a few cars passed by. The radio played a gentle hymn that I knew well, "Amazing Grace." The melody filled the space, accompanied by the rhythmic sound of tires on the road. I clearly remember the moment everything changed. 1 second, I was softly singing along to the music. The next thing, I saw the car coming towards me. "No, no, no," I shouted, instinctively turning the steering wheel. It all happened so fast that I didn't have time to process it. The last thing I saw was the car invading my lane, its speed absurd. The impact was deafening, metal against metal. My body was thrown against the seatbelt. The world seemed to fall apart around me. Broken glass, the sound of something heavy being dragged, and then absolute silence. When I opened my eyes, the scenery seemed frozen, but something was strange. My body remained motionless inside the destroyed car. I looked around, confused. Everything felt different. There was no pain, just a feeling of lightness and peace. I tried to move my arm, but I couldn't. That's when I realized I was no longer in control of my body. From above, I could see the accident scene as if I were watching a movie. There I was, trapped in the wreckage. I saw the flashing lights of ambulances and paramedics rushing to catch up to me. They worked frantically to get me out of the car, while others tried to help the driver of the other vehicle, a man who was visibly intoxicated. Suddenly, something caught my attention. The Bible I was carrying had been thrown out of the car and was in the air, slowly spinning. It was as if time had slowed down. Every detail seemed so clear, so real, that I could see the sunlit dust particles around her. I should have been panicking, but I wasn't. There was an indescribable peace, as if a silent voice was telling me, "It's okay." That was the morning that changed everything. The last morning I lived like before. At first, I didn't understand what was happening. My mind was clear, but my body remained motionless in the wreckage of the car. It was as if I were a spectator of the scene. The peace I felt didn't make sense. There was no pain, fear, or despair. On the contrary, everything felt right. As I looked down, I saw the paramedics racing against time. One of them, a young man with serious eyes and steady hands, placed a neck brace around my neck, trying to stabilize my head. "Does she still have a pulse?" he asked, while another shook his head. My heart should sink upon hearing this, but it doesn't. I just felt acceptance. As I got closer, without knowing exactly how, I saw something that should have been impossible. There was an aura around each person. It was like a luminous outline, shining in soft colors. The man trying to revive me emanated a serene blue hue, while the drunk driver was a turbulent, almost distressing red. He was sitting on the sidewalk, with his head in his hands, repeating, "I didn't want to. I didn't want to." However, something different caught my attention. The Bible, my gift to Ethan, seemed to defy the laws of physics. It was still spinning in the air, slowly, as if time was stuck in a strange cycle. Every detail of it was crystal clear: the gold lettering, the texture of the leather, even a small oil stain on the back cover that I hadn't noticed before. As I watched, I realized I was not alone. I felt a presence next to me. It was subtle but unmistakable, a warm, loving energy, like an invisible hug. I didn't need to ask who or what it was. Something inside me knew it was a divine presence, guiding me. "You're not lost," a soft voice spoke, but not in words. It was as if the sound echoed inside me, directly into my soul. "This is just the beginning." Suddenly, the scene began to change. The physical world seemed to move away, as if being pulled back. The ambulance lights grew dimmer, the sounds dissipated, and everything around me became lighter, more ethereal. My perception of time has also changed. There was no longer a linear flow. One second seemed to stretch for hours, while other moments passed in the blink of an eye. Every detail I observed, the paramedics, movements, the pained expression on the driver's face, was imbued with meaning. It was as if I could feel the emotional weight of every action. As all this was happening, I realized I was being drawn upward, gently, as if I were floating on an invisible river. With each instant, the distance between me and the physical world increased. I looked down one last time and saw my body. The woman trapped in that car no longer looked like me. She was just a shell, an empty vessel. Then, I felt an irresistible force pulling me. Light began to form in the distance, but it was no ordinary light. It was alive, pulsating, and called to me with an indescribable sweetness. With every inch I got closer, I left what was earthly behind. I was about to cross over into something bigger, something I couldn't fully understand but knew was my next destination. I was drawn to the light like a thirsty traveler finds an oasis in the desert. There was no fear, just a deep yearning for what I felt was before me. The light was not just a glare that blinded the eyes. It was a living, pulsating presence that radiated love in its purest form. As I got closer, I noticed that the light formed a tunnel. He was not rigid or static. The edges flickered with dynamic patterns, like waves of moving water, but with divine precision. Each pattern seemed to contain a meaning, something that I felt was impossible to translate into human words. Upon entering the tunnel, I was overcome by a peace so profound that it transcended any earthly sensation. It was as if all the burdens in my life, fears, hurts, regrets, simply evaporated. There was no longer a need to fight, prove, or justify. I was accepted. I was loved. With every step, or maybe it was floating, I felt as if the light was surrounding me, filling every part of who I was. The voice I had heard before, which spoke directly to my soul, now seemed to come from all directions, echoing softly, "You are coming home." All around me, time seemed to unfold like a fan. Moments from my life began to appear, not as vague memories, but as if I were living it all over again. I saw myself as a child, running barefoot through a field of flowers while my grandmother called me. I remembered the day my son was born, the overwhelming joy of holding him in my arms for the first time. Each memory was filled with emotion, with details that I didn't know I still had. As I made my way through the tunnel, I realized that the light wasn't just love, she was knowledge. It was as if all of creation, the stars, the mountains, the flowers, even me, were part of a grand plan that made absolute sense. Each pulsing pattern in the light told a story, but I could only understand fragments. Even so, I knew that everything, absolutely everything, was connected. Then something changed. I began to feel a stronger presence at the end of the tunnel. It was as if the light was guiding me to a specific place, to an encounter that I knew would be the most important of my existence. As I approached, I saw figures emerging from the edges of the light. They looked human, but not in an ordinary way. There were no striking physical details, but I knew without a shadow of a doubt that these were people I loved and who were gone. My grandmother was among them. She had the same warm smile she always used to comfort me when I was a child. "Harper," she said, without moving her lips. His words reached me like comforting warmth. "It's not time yet. There's something you need to know." Before I could ask what she meant, I felt a change in the atmosphere around me. The light began to intensify. It became brighter, more alive, as if it was preparing to reveal something extraordinary. Deep in my soul, I knew I was about to meet something, or someone, that would forever change who I was. As I approached the end of the tunnel, the figures I had seen before became clearer. They weren't just silhouettes, they were people I knew and loved, but who had left this world a long time ago. There was my grandmother, Clara, with her kind face and that smile that always made my heart feel at home. Beside him, I saw my older brother, Samuel, who had passed away when I was still a teenager. He looked as young and vibrant as he had the last summer we were together. They didn't speak, at least not in the way we are used to. His words reached me like waves of heat, conveying love, acceptance, and a deep understanding that went beyond what words could express. It was as if every emotion and thought was shared instantly between us. My grandmother stepped forward and looked at me tenderly. "You've done so much, Harper," she said, but not soundlessly. The message was inside me before I knew it. "We are so proud of you, but your journey is not over yet." Confusion arose in my heart. What do you mean my journey isn't over? Why was I here then? I wanted to ask, but before I could form the words, I felt a comforting warmth coming from Samuel. He seemed to be sharing something with me, childhood memories, happy moments we shared before he left. He didn't need to talk. I just knew what he meant. "Remember who you are," was the message that echoed in my heart. More figures started to appear around. Some I recognized immediately. Aunts, uncles, childhood friends. Others were less familiar, but I still knew we were connected. Each of them emanated pure love, without judgment or expectations. It was like being surrounded by everything good and pure that I had ever experienced in my life. My grandmother held my hands, or whatever I had there, as my body no longer felt physical. His touch was warm and comforting, like a blanket on a cold night. "There is something you need to see," she said, and in an instant, the entire environment around me changed. Suddenly, I was no longer in the tunnel. I was transported to important moments in my life. I found myself at school, reading aloud while other children laughed at my stutter. I felt the pain, but also the determination that was born at that moment. I saw the birth of my son Thomas and the mixture of joy and fear that gripped me when I held him for the first time. I relived the lonely nights after my husband's death, when I thought I wouldn't have the strength to carry on, but found comfort in my faith. Each memory had a purpose, as if they were pieces of a puzzle that were finally starting to make sense. The message was clear. My life, with all its struggles and triumphs, had meaning. Even the small acts, the forgotten moments of kindness, resonated with an importance I never imagined. Back in the tunnel, my grandmother smiled again. "You're not done yet, Harper," she said softly. "There is something bigger waiting for you." Before I could ask what it was, I felt another presence approaching. It was unlike anything I had experienced up to that point. The light around me began to intensify, becoming almost blinding. I knew without a doubt that I was about to encounter something, or someone, that transcended everything I knew. The light around me became brighter, almost unbearable to my senses, but at the same time, there was a deep comfort, as if I were being enveloped in an eternal embrace. The approaching presence was unlike any other I had felt. She radiated power and humility, love and authority, in a fusion that seemed impossible to understand, but completely natural at that moment. Then I saw him. Jesus Christ was before me. He was not exactly like the images we see in paintings or sculptures. He was both things at the same time, the simple carpenter of Nazareth and the glorified King. His clothes shone with a golden light, but it wasn't the fabric that was impressive. It was him. His presence was so intense that I felt small, but at the same time, infinitely important. His eyes met mine, and in them I saw everything: love, compassion, wisdom, and a depth that seemed to contain the entire universe. He didn't speak right away, but when he did, his voice sounded like a peaceful river flowing through a valley. "Harper," he said, calling me by name in such a personal way that it felt like he'd known me forever. "I was with you every moment, from your first breath until now." Images began to form around us. I saw my entire life, as if I were watching a movie, but in details that I could never remember on my own. I saw moments when I felt alone and desperate, and I realized he was there. In every tear shed, in every silent prayer, he was by my side, even when I couldn't perceive him. "You are not here by chance," he continued, walking towards me. His hand touched my shoulder, and the warmth I felt wasn't just physical. It was as if he was healing every part of my being, my mind, my heart, and even painful memories. "There is something that needs to be shown to you, something you need to share." Suddenly, the scenery around us changed. We were in a vast field, and in the distance, I could see a world that seemed both familiar and strange. It was the future. I saw people living in apparent harmony, but something was wrong. There was a false perfection in that world. A global system of control had been established, disguised as progress and technology. I saw biometric devices being implanted in people, something they willingly accepted in exchange for comfort and security. "This is the mark," said Jesus, with sadness in his eyes. "It will not be imposed by force, but by deception." Those who accept this are making a conscious choice to reject the truth and follow deception. I have seen the consequences of this system. Families were separated. Those who resisted were marginalized, persecuted, and labeled as enemies of progress. I saw faith communities living underground, united only by their belief in God. There were few of them, but their strength came from something greater than themselves. "You must warn," Jesus said, looking directly at me. "It won't be easy, but you will have the grace you need to accomplish your mission." Before I could respond, I felt like he knew what I was thinking. He smiled, a smile that carried both sadness and hope. "Remember, Harper, I overcame the world, and what is to come will be just a moment before the final victory." His hand touched my forehead, and the vision disappeared. I was overcome by an indescribable peace and an unshakable certainty that no matter what happens, he will always be with me. As the vision unfolded, I was transported to a future that seemed frighteningly real. The landscape before me was a mix of familiarity and strangeness. I recognized big and small cities, but they seemed transformed. Glowing towers of advanced technology replaced historic monuments. Autonomous vehicles glided through the streets, and holographic screens projected messages of unity and progress. However, there was something deeply unsettling about this scenario. People were connected to a global system that seemed to control them in subtle but total ways. Everyone wore a small, implant-like device that glowed faintly in their hands or foreheads. This implant seemed to be the key to everyday life. Access to money, transportation, healthcare, and even housing depended on it. "This is the mark," Jesus' voice echoed within me, even though he was no longer visible. "It will be presented as a solution to humanity's problems: inequality, economic crisis, climate change. But behind that, there is a deception." I watched as people accepted the implant without hesitation. It was promoted as something inevitable, the next natural step in technological evolution. I saw advertising campaigns that promised ease and comfort, a life without worries, just one touch and everything is yours. The appeal was undeniable. But Jesus showed me what was hidden. Accepting that brand was not just a matter of convenience, it was a conscious rejection of God and an alliance with something dark. I saw secret meetings between world leaders and giant corporations. They weren't just promoting the brand, they were planning how to consolidate their power over humanity. The message was clear: total control, disguised as progress. Those who resisted were labeled as conspiracists, fanatics, or enemies of peace. They lost access to the system. Their accounts were frozen, their homes confiscated, and their voices silenced. I also saw those who chose to resist. They were few, but united. Small underground communities emerged, where people maintained their faith and lived far from the global system. They shared everything: food, shelter, and, above all, hope. But resistance had a price. Many were persecuted, arrested, or even killed. The scene changed again, and I saw something even more disturbing. A man, charismatic and magnetic, emerged as the leader of the system. He seemed to speak with authority and calm, but his eyes betrayed something cold and calculating. He promised a perfect world, a paradise on earth, but I knew his words were deceptive. He is the Antichrist, the voice of Jesus said inside me, and he will lead many into deception. The consequences of choosing the brand were clear. I saw people being transformed, their souls disconnecting from everything that was good, while an emptiness spread within them. It was a crushing weight to see, but Jesus also showed me something else. He showed me the ending. This time will be brief, he said, and my victory will be complete. Suddenly, I saw the glory of his return. I saw heavens opening and an army of light descending with him. The darkness that had taken over the world was dispelled in an instant. The brand, the system, the deception, everything disappeared before his presence. And those who remained faithful, even in the midst of persecution, were welcomed into his arms. I returned to the tunnel of light with a heavy heart, but also full of new determination. I knew that what I had seen was not just a warning, but a calling. My mission was clear: to share these revelations, even if it was difficult. After the visions of the mark of the beast and the global control system, I was transported to a completely different scenario. Now I saw small communities of people who had chosen to resist the brand. They were dispersed, living hidden, far from the reach of the system. Although their conditions were humble and often precarious, there was something in them that was missing in the outside world: an unwavering glow of faith and hope. These communities were scattered in remote locations: dense forests, caves, abandoned villages. They had little in the way of material comforts, but much in the way of purpose and unity. I saw men and women kneeling in fervent prayer, children learning Bible passages by candlelight, and young people who had taken on the responsibility of protecting their communities from potential threats. A leader in one of these communities caught my attention. He was a tall man, with scars on his face and a look that mixed strength and kindness. His name was Elijah, and I knew he was a shepherd, even though his clothes were simple and worn. I saw Elijah standing before a small group, holding an old Bible, the only one in the community. "I know it's hard," he said, his voice firm but charged with emotion. "They try to convince us that we are the fools, that resistance is futile. But we are not alone. God is with us. He gives us strength to continue." The group listened attentively, their faces lit with a mixture of faith and determination. Even with the obvious fear, and they had reason to fear, no one seemed willing to give in. Then, the scene changed. I saw the persecution these communities faced. I saw armed guards storming one of the hideouts, shouting orders and arresting men and women. I saw people being taken for interrogation, accused of rebelling against the system. The price of resistance was high. Many paid with their lives, while others suffered torture and humiliation. Despite this, I saw something that seemed impossible: an unshakable love. Even under threat, these people continued to pray for their persecutors. I saw a woman named Miriam being taken into custody, her hands tied, but her lips still murmuring prayers. "Forgive them, Lord," she said, as her captors mocked her. "They don't know what they're doing." These communities faced not only hostility from the system, but also rejection from those close to them. Families were divided. I saw brothers who had accepted the mark rejecting those who resisted. Parents turned against children, and longtime friends became enemies. The social pressure to give in was overwhelming, but those who resisted knew that their struggle was not just physical, but spiritual. However, in the midst of this darkness, I also saw miracles. I saw sick people being healed through prayer. I saw hardened hearts being transformed. I saw children who, even without fully understanding what was happening, demonstrated a faith that defied all logic. God's grace was present, sustaining them every step of the way. The message given to me was clear: the difficulties would be great, but God's grace would be greater. Each of these resistors had a role in the divine plan, and no one would be forgotten. Even in the darkest circumstances, the light of faith would continue to shine. As the scenes faded, I felt a deep admiration for these people. They were not heroes in the conventional sense. They were ordinary people, like me, who had made an extraordinary choice. I understood that although the persecution was intense, God would never abandon them. They were living proof that, even in the face of the darkest forces, faith always finds a way. Suddenly, the scenario changed again. I was transported to a moment that transcended anything I had ever seen. It was as if the entire world was in a state of expectation. There was a palpable tension, like the silence before a storm. The skies were dark, but not ordinary darkness. It was a charged darkness, almost alive, pulsing with energy. Then, it all started. The sky opened with a light so intense that it seemed to consume the darkness itself. This light was not like the one I had seen in the tunnel before. She was even more glorious, radiating an indescribable authority. I saw angelic figures emerging from the light, forming a heavenly army. They were majestic, their robes shining like fire, but it was the figure in the center that captured all my attention. Jesus Christ was returning. He was no longer the humble man I had met in the tunnel. He was now the glorified King, riding a white horse, with eyes that glowed like flames. His presence was so overwhelming that even the forces of darkness, which had previously seemed invincible, trembled before him. In his hand, he carried a sword, but at the same time, there was a deep peace in his expression. I saw the whole world react to his return. Those who had followed the mark of the beast system fell to their knees, not in worship, but in terror. They recognized at that moment that they had chosen the wrong side. I saw world leaders who had once ruled with arrogance, now trembling before the king's majesty. They tried to hide, but there was no place to flee. At the same time, I saw the faithful, those who had resisted until the end, being gathered together by angels. They were weak, many injured, but their faces shone with joy. They knew victory had come. I saw Elias, the community leader I had observed earlier, kneeling in tears of gratitude. I saw Miriam, still handcuffed, being freed by angelic hands. There was a celebration on their faces, a joy I can't describe. The forces of evil were defeated in an instant. There was no long battle. The presence of Christ was enough for everything to be resolved. He raised his hand, and the brand that had dominated the world was destroyed. The global system that seemed unbreakable disintegrated like dust in the wind. Divine justice had prevailed. Then I saw something even more beautiful, the complete restoration. The earth, which was once marked by destruction and suffering, began to renew itself. I saw fields blooming where there was once desolation, crystal-clear rivers flowing where there was drought. Nature seemed to sing in harmony with the King. Jesus turned to the faithful and said something that echoed throughout the universe. "Welcome home." His words were filled with love and promise. He wiped away each person's tears, healed the wounds of their bodies and hearts. It was the beginning of something completely new, a realm where there was no more pain, fear, or death. As I watched all this, my heart was filled with indescribable joy. I knew, without a shadow of a doubt, that this was the absolute truth. Christ had won, and evil would never have the final word. The message was clear. Suffering was temporary, but God's victory was eternal. As the vision began to fade, I felt the voice of Jesus in my heart one last time. "Harper, tell the world what you saw. Tell them that I am coming back and that my victory is certain." As the vision of Christ's return and the restoration of the earth began to fade, I felt a tug, as if something was taking me back to the physical world. The light around me began to dim, and I realized that the tunnel of living light was slowly closing. The peace I felt remained intact, but something else now lived within me. A mission, a purpose that could not be ignored. Suddenly, I felt like I was falling. It was not a scary fall, but a return to the weight and density of the physical body. I heard muffled voices around me and a continuous sound, like a heart monitor. I opened my eyes, and the first thing I saw was the face of a paramedic. His eyes widened when he realized I was awake. "She's back!" he shouted to the others. There was a mixture of relief and amazement in his voice. I later discovered that I had been dead for 21 minutes and 37 seconds. This shouldn't be possible, but there I was, alive, breathing, and completely aware of what had just happened. In the hospital, as I recovered, I spent days reflecting on what I had seen and heard. The clarity of the experience was as sharp as any memory I had from my life. Every detail, every word, every vision seemed engraved in my being. I knew I couldn't just move on as if nothing had happened. As the days went by, I began to notice things around me that made me think of the visions. The news was full of reports about technological advances, biometric implants being tested on a large scale, digital currencies becoming the norm, and increasingly sophisticated surveillance systems being introduced in the name of security. It was like watching the puzzle pieces fall into place before me. I wasn't a person given to conspiracy theories or scaremongering, but I couldn't ignore the similarities between what was happening in the world and what I had seen. I began to discreetly share my experience with people close to me, but always in a humble way and without forcing anyone to believe. I know this might sound crazy, I would say, but I want you to be prepared. Something bigger is coming. Many people listened with skepticism. Some reacted kindly, but with looks that revealed doubts. Others, like my daughter-in-law Clara, listened with genuine attention. "Harper," she said one day, holding my hand, "I believe in you. I don't know what that means, but I'm with you." Despite the resistance I encountered, I continued to share when I felt the time was right. I didn't seek out big platforms, nor did I write books or give talks. My life followed its usual course, but with a renewed focus on faith and spiritual preparation. I started praying more, studying the scriptures more, and being more present for my family, especially my grandson Ethan, whose baptism I almost didn't witness. What I learned from all of this is simple but profound. God never abandons us. Even in the darkest times, His grace is sufficient. The trials we face now and those to come are fleeting, but the final victory belongs to Him. My mission is not to convince anyone, but just to be a witness to what I saw and trust that God will do the rest. The main message that has been engraved in my heart is this: prepare, but not with fear, but with faith. No matter how difficult things may seem, the light of Christ will prevail. This, I know, is the truth. After my recovery, I returned to my routine in Helena, Montana. At first glance, my life seemed as normal as it had been before the accident, helping Thomas and Clara with baby Ethan, shopping at the local market, and watching the mountain sunset. But inside, everything was different. The near-death experience had transformed not only my outlook on life, but also the way I interacted with the world. The message I received was not to be kept, but it also wasn't something I should grandly proclaim or seek recognition for. I understood that my role was simple: to share what I saw and what I knew, at the right time, with the right people. One day, while walking through the park with Ethan in the stroller, a woman approached. His face was lined with exhaustion, and his eyes reflected something familiar, an inner struggle. She asked to sit next to me and, after a few minutes of casual conversation, began to talk about her difficulties. She was dealing with a painful breakup and felt her faith was wavering. Without planning, I started sharing parts of my experience. I spoke about the infinite love I felt in the presence of Christ, about the certainty that we are never alone, even in the darkest moments. I didn't mention visions of the future at that time. Instead, I focused on hope and the promise that God is always there. She started to cry, but not out of sadness. "I needed to hear that," she said, holding my hand. "I feel like there's a reason I came to you today." This type of interaction started to happen more frequently. Strangers opened up to me in ways I had never experienced before. It was as if something in me, perhaps the peace I carried from the tunnel of light, attracted them. I shared what I could, always asking God to guide my words. At the same time, I began to observe the signs of the world more closely. I saw technology advancing towards what the visions had shown. I saw political and social discussions that seemed to pave the way for global control. But instead of feeling scared, I felt an inexplicable peace. I knew that all of this was part of a greater plan, and that, in the end, victory belonged to Christ. This certainty gave me the strength to continue living simply, but intentionally. I began spending more time with my family, teaching Ethan about God's goodness through stories and examples. Thomas, although still skeptical about my experience, began to show small signs of curiosity. Clara, on the other hand, became my spiritual ally, always ready to listen and pray with me. The message I carry with me is this: no matter how challenging the times ahead, we are never without hope. Jesus showed me that even the smallest acts of kindness have an eternal impact. A smile, a word of encouragement, a silent prayer, all contribute to the divine plan. I know that many may choose not to believe what I experienced. That doesn't worry me. My task is to sow the seeds of faith and trust that God will do the rest. I am not a preacher nor a famous writer. I'm just Harper Ellington, a grandmother in Helena, Montana, who has had the privilege of catching a glimpse of God's love and victory. And this victory, I know with all the certainty of my being, is certain.